Prologue. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting its golden glow over the fields of ripe grain. A gentle breeze stirred the stalks, whispering a serene melody that harmonized with the distant chatter of birds. In the quiet of this pastoral scene, an armored figure stood beside a simple farmer and his young daughter, their silhouettes framed by the fading light.
"You thought you could escape your destiny, brother,"
the imposing ultramarine said, his voice cold and metallic through the box grill of his helmet. The aquila on his chest plate gleamed in the fading sunlight, and the blue of his ceramite armor stood out starkly against the earthy tones of the field. The farmer, once a space marine, now a man of the land, lowered his rake. His broad shoulders bore the weight of scars both visible and unseen. The faint remnants of the chapter insignia on his forearm were barely visible beneath the worn fabric of his sleeve. He met the ultramarine's gaze without fear. "But I do," he replied, his voice firm yet weary. "You're going to kill me. I know this. I see the hate in your eyes. A hatred so deep for someone you've never truly known." The girl, her blue hair shimmering in the sunlight and two small, straight horns rising from her forehead, clutched a wicker basket of freshly picked apples. She looked between the two men, one a titan of war, the other her father. She did not understand the words exchanged, but the tension in the air made her small hands tremble. The farmer's lips curled into a sad smile. "Do you know why you hate me so much, brother? It is because I have escaped my destiny. The same fate that has claimed so many of us and will claim many more." The ultramarine's gauntleted fist clenched, the servos in his armor whirring. He said nothing, but the silence was louder than any shout. "I laid down my bolter. I cast aside my armor to lead a life of my own choosing," the farmer continued. His voice grew softer, almost wistful. "I have cared for this land. I have reaped bountiful harvests. I have a family. My wife, my child. They are my life now. And though I gave up much to leave behind what we were, I have gained more than I ever dreamed." He stepped forward, the afternoon light revealing deep lines on his weathered face. "Look at my scars, brother. Look at my face. Have I not earned this peace? This simple life? Beyond the blood and death of the galaxy, is this not enough?" The ultramarine's gaze flicked to the girl, then back to the farmer.
"You wish to be forgotten,"
he said, his tone laced with disdain.
"To fade away while we fight and die in your place."
"We will all be forgotten one day," the farmer replied. "But when I die, I will be mourned. Not as a name on a wall that no one reads, but as a father, a husband, a man who gave love and received it in return." The girl tugged at her father's sleeve.
"Papa, who is this man? Why does he speak so strangely?"
The farmer knelt beside her, placing a rough, gentle hand on her blue hair, careful to avoid her straight horns. "Maria, my child. Run home. Do not look back. But do as I say, Maria. Please." The girl hesitated, then nodded. She turned and ran, her small feet kicking up dust as she disappeared down the dirt path. The farmer watched her go, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "You see, brother," he said, rising to his full height. "I have created something that will outlast us both. This land, this family. They are my legacy. Not the bodies I left on battlefields, nor the worlds I helped destroy." The ultramarine raised his bolter, the barrel steady as it pointed at the farmer's chest.
"There is only war,"
he said, the words a mantra, a justification. "That is what we shouted as worlds burned and billions died," the farmer said softly. "But war is not all there is. It is all you know, but it is not all there can be. You could have this too. Peace, creation, love. Although I know you will not. The will to go beyond war has been taken from you." The ultramarine's finger hovered over the trigger. For a moment, the only sound was the rustling of the fields and the distant laughter of a child. "I served with honor," the farmer said. "I am not a traitor. I only hope that the one holding the bolter to your own skull one day gives you the same respect I have given you." The ultramarine stiffened, his armor's servos whining as he adjusted his stance.
"Enough.
The golden light of the setting sun reflected off his ceramite armor, casting long shadows across the field. His voice, when it finally came, was colder than the void of space.
You speak of peace,
the ultramarine began,
of love, of creation. But what you do not understand, brother, no, former brother, is that your peace is a lie, bought with the blood of countless others. You call it destiny, but I call it duty. A duty you abandoned, a duty we still carry, even as the galaxy drowns in fire and blood.
His gauntleted hand tightened on the bolter's grip, the servos in his armor whining softly.
The galaxy is in flames. Chaos consumes worlds, annihilating entire populations in their billions. Families, fathers, sons, daughters, innocents who cry out for salvation as they are slaughtered. And yet here you are, speaking of fields and family, as if you are not complicit in their suffering.
The farmer's gaze remained steady, but a flicker of pain crossed his weathered face.
You talk of escaping destiny and finding a life of your own choosing,
the ultramarine continued, his voice rising with barely restrained anger.
But your life, your death, they were never your own to choose. Not because of the Imperium, but because of the countless enemies that lurk in the darkness, enemies only we can hold back. You were forged to be a weapon, a shield against the horrors that would consume humanity. And yet you turned your back on that sacred purpose.
He took a step closer.
Do you think your daughter could stand against a Tyranid Carnifex? A demon of the warp? The forces of the archenemy who would see this world burn to ash? Who will defend her when they come, as they surely will? Do you think the soil beneath your feet is safe because you willed it so? Every moment you have lived here in peace was bought by the lives of thousands of guardsmen and space marines. And yet you chose to desert your battle brothers. You chose to turn your back on the countless lives that depend on us to hold the line.
The farmer's lips parted to speak, but the ultramarine cut him off.
You speak of honor,
he spat, the Vox grill amplifying his disdain.
Do we not all serve with honor? Do we not all fight to the bitter end? And yet, here you stand, cloaked in cowardice, hiding from the nightmare that is our existence. You have power, the strength, the skill, the will, to make a difference, yet you squander it for your own selfish desires. You've abandoned the Imperium, and for what?
The ultramarine's bolter wavered, but his voice grew darker.
Do not speak to me of peace, brother. Peace is a fleeting dream for those who can afford to sleep. For us, there is only war. Only sacrifice. And for every moment you live here in comfort, know that countless others die nameless and forgotten so you can cling to this illusion.
He lowered the bolter slightly, his gaze piercing through the farmer's soul.
I will not take the sin of slaying you, but know this, I despise you. I despise the cowardice that festers in your heart. And I hope that every guardsman, every space marine who dies to protect your peace will haunt your dreams. Their blood is on your hands.
The ultramarine turned away, his cape catching the wind as he began to walk. He stopped after a few paces and looked over his shoulder.
Soon, they will come to this world as well. Chaos, Xenos, or something worse. When that day comes, who will stand to defend them? You. Or will you run again? Think about that, farmer.
Chapter 1 Loyalty is its own reward. The stillness of the night cloaked the Roswell Palace in an eerie serenity. The sprawling estate, nestled among the rolling hills and dense woods, stood proud and silent under the moon's gaze. The faint sound of chirping crickets was the only company to the flickering lanterns lining the garden paths. Amelia walked along the garden's edge, the soft glow of the moonlight accentuating her silver hair as it swayed gently with her steps. The sweet fragrance of blooming roses filled the air, but her gaze was distracted, her amethyst eyes locked on the heavens. She sighed, letting out a soft murmur. Such a quiet night. Almost too quiet. Ram, who had accompanied her, glanced up from tending to the flower beds, her sharp eyes narrowing. Miss Amelia, something feels off. The ground beneath their feet vibrated subtly, an almost imperceptible tremor. Amelia froze, her heart skipping a beat. Do you feel that? Before Ram could respond, the vibration turned into a low rumble. Both women's heads snapped upward as the peaceful night was ripped apart. From the depths of the darkened sky, a fiery object descended rapidly, cutting through the heavens like a blade. It wasn't massive by any means, barely larger than a person, but the sheer speed and heat surrounding it made it seem like a fragment of the sun itself. A meteor. Amelia's voice was laced with disbelief as the fiery sphere hurtled straight for the palace gardens. "Stand back," Ram barked, gripping her staff tightly. Her tone carried the urgency of someone accustomed to danger. The meteor slammed into the garden with an explosive force that shook the palace to its very foundations. The impact released a shockwave, flattening hedges and shattering the stained glass windows of the nearby hall. Dirt and debris erupted into the air, creating a cloud of dust that obscured the stars. Amelia stumbled backward, shielding her face from the intense heat radiating from the crater. Flames licked at the edges of the impact site, setting the surrounding flowerbeds ablaze. Ram moved in front of Amelia, summoning a protective barrier just as a fragment of the meteor's shockwave surged toward them. The translucent shield flickered under the strain but held strong, deflecting the brunt of the force. What had appeared to be a meteor had turned the tranquil grounds into a battlefield of smoke and flames. Amelia and Ram stared at the crater, its edges glowing red-hot, with steam rising from scorched earth and crushed flora. The intense heat warped the air around it, distorting their view of the object nestled at its center. But something was off. The supposed meteor shifted. A low, guttural groan echoed from the depths of the crater, sending shivers down Amelia's spine. The figure that emerged was no stone. It was a man. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the figure lay slumped at the heart of the crater, his massive frame illuminated by the dying embers clinging to his form. His armor, once a symbol of unparalleled strength, was now a shattered relic of its former glory. The upper chest plate had been completely destroyed, exposing a torso riddled with old scars and fresh burns. What remained of his helmet cracked and fell away as he shifted slightly, revealing his face, a face that bore the evidence of countless battles. Deep scars crisscrossed his features, a map of a warrior's history etched into his skin. His strong jaw and weathered brow spoke of resilience, but his expression was that of a man who had carried the weight of endless wars. His eyes, though faintly glowing, were sunken, clouded with exhaustion and pain. Amelia's breath hitched at the sight, her amethyst eyes widening with a mix of awe and sorrow. "He's human." Ram, standing behind her, was less convinced. "A human who has survived what no ordinary man could." "Keep your distance, Lady Amelia. Whatever he is, he's dangerous." But Amelia couldn't tear her eyes away. The massive axe embedded in his chest, jagged and ancient, seemed almost cruel, a mark of defeat that defied his imposing presence. Blood seeped slowly from the wound, pooling beneath him and staining the scorched earth. "He's hurt," Amelia said softly, her voice trembling. Ram stepped closer, raising her staff cautiously. "And for good reason, no doubt. Someone put that axe there with intent. Don't think for a moment they didn't know what they were doing." "I can't just let him die," Amelia replied, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her. Without waiting for Ram's approval, she knelt beside the fallen warrior. The heat still radiating from his body made her wince, but she pressed her hands forward, summoning her healing magic. A soft, green light emanated from her palms, flowing over his scarred chest and the deep wound surrounding the embedded axe. The man stirred, a low, guttural groan escaping his lips as the magic began to take hold. His head turned slightly, his scarred face briefly catching the flickering light of the fire around them. Even in his unconscious state, his expression was tense, as though locked in the echoes of battles long past. "Who could have done this to you?" Amelia murmured, her voice breaking slightly. The axe resisted her magic, its malevolent energy pulsing faintly, as if clinging to its victim. Amelia furrowed her brow in concentration, her magic intensifying as she worked to stabilize him. The light of her healing spell wavered, but she didn't falter. Ram watched silently, her staff still raised, ready to act at a moment's notice. "You're putting us at risk," she said, though there was no malice in her tone, only concern. If he's lived through wars and pain like this, Amelia said, glancing back at Ram, her eyes brimming with determination, then he deserves another chance. No one should have to suffer like this. The man groaned again, his glowing eyes flickering faintly as his breathing deepened. Though he was far from conscious, there was a subtle shift in his body, as though the warmth of Amelia's magic was reaching him. Ram sighed, lowering her staff slightly. Your kindness will get you killed one day, Lady Amelia. The massive warrior remained motionless except for the rise and fall of his chest. The once malevolent glow of the axe had dimmed, though it remained embedded in his body like a cruel reminder of his fall. Amelia wiped the sweat from her brow, exhaustion creeping into her as she poured the last of her strength into stabilizing him. For now, the battlefield warrior was silent, his countless scars telling the story of a life filled with endless struggle. Amelia, however, saw something beyond the scars and the destruction, a life worth saving. In the quiet aftermath, she whispered softly, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames, "Who are you, really?" The Space Marine's eyes flickered open, his enhanced senses jolting to life. His surroundings were alien, soft fabrics, ornate carvings on the walls, and faint sunlight filtering through elegant curtains. This was no battlefield. He frowned, the scene clashing with the instincts ingrained in him through years, no, decades, of training. He sat up abruptly, the sheets sliding off his body. The cool air brushed against his skin, and he realized with surprise that he was completely naked. His fingers traced the contours of his body, noting the absence of scars, implants, or any sign of battle damage. His memory faltered, providing no answers. Who was he? Why was he here? Suddenly, movement caught his attention. By the door, two figures huddled together. They were young women, one with blue hair, the other pink, dressed in what looked like maid uniforms. Their expressions were a mix of terror and awe, their bodies trembling like cornered prey. The sight unsettled him. He had no memory of these people, yet their fear suggested they knew him, or what he was. But what was that? His mind offered fragments, drills in vast halls, combat maneuvers under unrelenting instructors, and an overwhelming sense of duty. But to whom? And for what purpose? He spoke, his voice deep and commanding, though it carried an edge of uncertainty. Where am I? The maids flinched, exchanging nervous glances. The blue-haired one managed to stammer, "Why, you're in the Mather's mansion, sir. Lady Amelia found you, unconscious, and brought you here." The name, Mather's mansion, sparked nothing in his fractured memory. His gaze shifted to his exposed body, scrutinizing it for any clue to his identity. His physique was unnaturally perfect, every muscle honed, his veins coursing with an energy that felt both alien and familiar. This was not the body of an ordinary man. A sharp question escaped his lips. Who removed my armor? The word felt right, though he couldn't picture what the armor looked like. He just knew it was important, sacred even. The pink-haired maid squeaked, her voice trembling. It was specialists from the capital. Lady Amelia ordered it, to save you. Save him. From what? His mind spiraled, grappling with the implications. If this Lady Amelia had resources to breach his armor he instinctively knew was nearly impenetrable, then she was someone of significance. But was she friend or foe? Standing, he loomed over the maids, his towering frame casting a shadow that made them shrink further into themselves. The act was unintentional, yet he couldn't suppress the pang of guilt as they cowered. He felt like a weapon without a wielder, powerful, yet aimless. He turned to the maids again. Why was I in this world? What do you know of me? The maids exchanged helpless looks, their fear overtaking any coherent response. The blue-haired one whispered, "Lady Amelia, she will explain, please, wait for her." He nodded, though his mind raced with questions. He didn't know why he was here, why his memory was fragmented, or why he felt an unrelenting drive to prepare for battle. But one thing was clear, he would find answers. And if this Lady Amelia held them, he would ensure she shared them, willingly or not. For now, though, he would wait. The door creaked open, and a young woman with long, silver hair stepped inside. She carried herself with grace, her amethyst eyes sparkling with a mixture of concern and curiosity. But the moment her gaze landed on the massive man sitting on the bed, the color drained from her face. The sheets had slid off his body, leaving him entirely exposed. Amelia's eyes widened in shock, and her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. Oh my goodness. She stammered, throwing her hands over her eyes and spinning around. Why don't you have any clothes on? The Space Marine tilted his head, momentarily confused by her outburst. Clothes. I awoke like this. His tone was calm, almost indifferent, as though his nudity was of no consequence to him. By the doorway, two smaller figures trembled, huddled together. The blue-haired maid, Rem, clung tightly to her sister Ram, her face similarly flushed and her eyes darting nervously toward the massive man. Ram, on the other hand, was peeking over her hand, her expression oscillating between irritation and embarrassment. For someone so large, you'd think he'd have the decency to cover himself, she muttered, though her own face betrayed her discomfort. The man frowned slightly and glanced down, only now noticing his state of undress. Ah. He pulled the sheet back up over his lap, though the act was more out of practicality than shame. I see. This is inconvenient. Amelia peeked through her fingers, ensuring the situation was at least somewhat contained, before daring to lower her hands. You could have said something. Or asked for clothes. I had no reason to assume this was improper, the man said plainly, his piercing gaze meeting hers. Is this body not ideal? It is designed for efficiency and combat. The statement only deepened Amelia's embarrassment. That's not the point. She blurted, her voice an octave higher than usual. Rem coughed awkwardly, keeping her eyes firmly averted. Lady Amelia, perhaps we should have given him something to wear before entering. Ram crossed her arms, though her blush remained. It's not our fault. How were we supposed to know he'd sit there like an overgrown exhibitionist? The man exhaled slowly, his patience clearly thinning. You too. The maids. If you are to serve this household, procure garments suitable for my size. Immediately. Ram bristled at the commanding tone. You could say please, you know. Rem tugged on her sister's sleeve, trying to calm her. Ram, he doesn't mean any harm. Let's just get him something to wear. Amelia, still red-faced, nodded quickly. Yes, please. Find something that fits him. Anything. Just hurry. The two maids scurried out, their flustered whispers echoing down the hallway. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, though her cheeks remained pink. I'm sorry about all this, she said, her voice softer now. We weren't expecting you to, wake up like this. The Space Marine nodded, his tone even. Your reaction is curious, but I understand now. I will await your return with clothing. As Amelia turned to leave, she muttered under her breath, why does this kind of thing always happen to me? As Amelia turned to leave, she paused at the doorway, glancing back at the towering figure on the bed. Her expression shifted, blending curiosity with a sense of urgency. Before I go, she said hesitantly, her voice steadying, may I make a request of you? The Space Marine straightened, his posture rigid and imposing even in his makeshift covering. His voice carried the weight of command, yet it remained respectful. Speak plainly, Lady Amelia. If your request is reasonable, I shall consider it. She clasped her hands in front of her, her amethyst eyes searching his face. Once you're dressed and settled, would you join me in the garden? I'd like to talk, to learn more about you, where you come from, and how you ended up here. The Marine regarded her silently for a moment, as though weighing the proposition. Your inquiry is not without merit. I, too, seek answers to the circumstances of my arrival. Very well. I shall meet you in this garden once I am appropriately attired. A small smile flickered across Amelia's face. Thank you. I'll be waiting. As she turned to go, she hesitated again, her cheeks flushing faintly. And, Please ensure you're properly dressed before coming out. It's important for maintaining decorum. The Marine inclined his head, his tone resolute. Understood. I will adhere to your customs and present myself with due propriety. Satisfied, Amelia nodded and slipped out of the room, the door clicking shut behind her. Left alone, the Marine's gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight streamed through fine curtains. His jaw tightened as his thoughts churned. A garden, a place of reflection and life. Strange that I should walk such grounds, yet perhaps there I shall uncover fragments of my purpose. His hands clenched into fists briefly, his mind sharpening. Until then, I must prepare myself. This world and its people warrant scrutiny, but cooperation may yet serve a greater goal. Left alone in the room, the Space Marine surveyed his surroundings with a sharp, analytical eye. The chamber was lavishly furnished, far removed from the utilitarian quarters he vaguely recalled from his fragmented memories. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, the furniture crafted from fine wood, and the bed itself, though the largest he had ever encountered, was barely sufficient for his enhanced frame. He shifted slightly, feeling its ornate frame creak under his weight. A place of opulence, he murmured, his deep voice low as his gaze lingered on the golden chandelier above. Such excess. An affront to efficiency. Yet, there is care in its design. Perhaps it serves a purpose beyond indulgence. With deliberate movements, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. The cold floor met his feet as he stood, his towering form filling the space. The sheet remained draped over his body, clutched firmly in one hand as he instinctively preserved his dignity. He glanced around once more, noting a tall mirror in the corner. His reflection stared back, a being of immense size, his physique a testament to genetic engineering and rigorous training. Scars lined his body, faint but unmistakable, each one a mark of survival from battles long forgotten. Even in this state, the Emperor's design endures, he said to himself, his tone steady but contemplative. His grip on the sheet tightened slightly. But why am I here? What foe have I been sent to confront, and why does my mind remain clouded? He stepped forward, the luxurious carpet muffling his heavy footfalls. Each movement was precise, almost predatory, as though his very nature resisted the relaxed atmosphere of the room. He approached a nearby window and pulled the curtains aside with his free hand. The view revealed a sprawling garden bathed in sunlight, its paths winding through vibrant flowers and meticulously trimmed hedges. Beyond it, the silhouette of a distant town could be seen, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills. A peaceful world, he muttered, his brow furrowing. Too peaceful. This is no battlefield, yet I sense danger lies beneath its surface. The door creaked open behind him, and he turned his head sharply, his stance instinctively defensive. The maids, Rem and Ram, stood at the threshold, their arms laden with folded garments. Their nervous expressions were unmistakable, though Ram's usual defiance lingered in her gaze. "We've brought clothing," Rem said softly, avoiding his eyes. "Good," the Marine replied, his voice measured. "Place them here. I shall dress at once." The maids hurried to comply, setting the garments on a nearby chair before retreating toward the door. Ram couldn't resist muttering under her breath, "Try not to destroy them. We don't have spare fabric for someone your size." The Marine regarded her with a raised brow but chose not to respond. Instead, he turned back to the window, the sheets still firmly in place, and waited until the door closed behind them. "Clothing," he said quietly, examining the garments from a distance. "An unnecessary complication, yet if it aids in blending with these people, so be it." With that, he began to dress, his movements deliberate and efficient, his thoughts already focused on the conversation awaiting him in the garden. The Space Marine approached the garments laid out for him, his sharp eyes quickly assessing the design and material. While they appeared to be made with care, they lacked the reinforced practicality he instinctively valued. He picked up the shirt first, inspecting the seams and stretching the fabric between his fingers. It was soft, too soft for combat or rigorous movement. Still, it seemed large enough to fit, so he began to pull it over his head. As the shirt settled across his torso, it became clear it was not truly made for someone of his immense build. The fabric stretched tightly across his broad chest and shoulders, clinging to his powerful musculature. His movements were restricted. Raising his arms caused the material to strain audibly, though it held together. HMPH, he muttered, his tone neutral but tinged with mild irritation. This garment is ill-suited for one of my stature. Yet, it suffices for now. Next, he reached for the pants, or what could loosely be called such. They were more akin to leggings, the material thinner and less structured than he would have preferred. As he pulled them on, he noted that the length barely reached past his knees, leaving most of his legs exposed. Shorts, he said, the unfamiliar term coming to him unbidden. He flexed his legs slightly, testing the fit. Adequate for movement, though lacking in protection. These people must value aesthetics over functionality. Fully dressed, or as much as the provided attire allowed, the Marine stood before the tall mirror. His reflection stared back, a hulking figure clad in garments that were clearly not designed for his physique. The shirt's tightness accentuated his musculature, while the short pants gave the impression of improvised attire rather than deliberate fashion. He let out a low exhale. This will suffice for now. Adaptation is a warrior's strength. The thought lingered as he turned toward the door, his heavy footsteps resounding softly against the floor. With his dignity preserved, albeit barely, he prepared to head to the garden, where answers might await. The Space Marine approached the door, his imposing frame nearly filling the width of the room. He reached for the handle and opened it with ease, only to pause as he analyzed the size of the doorway. The entryway was woefully inadequate. Narrow and low, it seemed designed for far smaller occupants, certainly not someone of his enhanced stature. He tilted his head, his expression thoughtful but calm. This structure was clearly not conceived with warriors in mind. A design oversight. Lowering his head, he attempted to step through, but his broad shoulders caught against the frame. He straightened slightly, reassessing the situation. HMPH, he muttered, his tone pragmatic. Adapt and overcome. With deliberate care, he crouched and turned slightly, angling his body to navigate the tight space. Even so, his shoulders scraped against the sides, and he had to lower himself further. Finally, he dropped to his hands and knees, crawling through the doorway with measured precision. The hallway beyond was scarcely better. As he rose to his feet, his head came perilously close to the ceiling, and the narrow corridor forced him to stoop slightly. He adjusted his posture, his movements methodical. This dwelling tests my patience, he remarked to himself, his voice a low rumble. Yet, it is a minor inconvenience. A warrior endures. Up ahead, the maids, Rem and Ram, waited at the staircase. Rem's expression was a mixture of awe and apprehension, while Ram crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she observed his struggle. Is even the door too small for you? Ram quipped, her tone sharp and unimpressed. The Marine straightened as much as the ceiling allowed, meeting her gaze with an unflinching stare. The fault lies not with my stature, but with the structure's inadequate design. Were this an imperial fortress, such oversights would not exist. Rem glanced nervously at her sister, while Ram raised an eyebrow. Well, excuse us for not constructing the manor that doesn't accommodate giants. Ignoring her sarcasm, the Marine shifted his focus to the staircase. It was narrow and steep, clearly designed for beings of more modest proportions. His expression remained stoic as he assessed the challenge. I will descend with care, he said, more to himself than to the maids. Then, addressing them directly, he added, lead the way to this garden. I shall follow. The maids exchanged a glance before starting down the stairs. The Marine followed, each step groaning under his weight as he moved with the precision and discipline ingrained in him by countless hours of training. He hadn't been fully aware of how he had made the journey through the mansion's corridors, let alone the method by which he had been brought inside. His enhanced senses and training told him that the maids had shown no sign of extraordinary strength, yet they must have found a way to transport him. The Space Marine moved with deliberate precision, his massive frame a stark contrast to the delicate surroundings. Each step was calculated, every movement carefully measured as he navigated the hallway. The chandeliers overhead, too low for his stature, loomed like fragile obstacles, but he adapted, ducking slightly to avoid them, never allowing himself to be distracted. Behind him, the faint sound of laughter from Rem and Ram reached his ears. They seemed amused by his efforts, their lightheartedness palpable in the air, but to him, it was nothing more than an insignificant noise. The beauty and frivolity of this place had no place in his world, and the distractions of their amusement would not deter him. Such lightheartedness in the face of danger, he muttered, though it was more for his own clarity than anything else. These fixtures, if destroyed, would be costly, but it is not worth the effort. I must stay focused. As he continued, his movements precise, Ram's teasing voice cut through the silence. Trying to avoid all of them. You might just spend the whole day dodging chandeliers instead of heading to the garden. The Marine didn't react to the banter. He simply moved forward, sidestepping the next chandelier with practiced ease. Delicate. Fragile. But necessary to navigate. I adapt. The hallway eventually gave way to a larger space, and there, before him, was the door leading to the garden. His body barely had to adjust to fit through it, its dimensions were large enough to accommodate him with ease. He moved forward without hesitation, his boots thudding softly on the ground as he passed through the threshold. The maids, trailing behind him, couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. They had expected him to struggle more. Ram's voice cut through the air again, laced with playful sarcasm. Well, I thought you'd have to squeeze through like a giant in a dollhouse. He didn't respond to her jests. The mission was clear. The garden awaited. With one last glance over his shoulder, he spoke firmly. Enough. The mission is what matters. Lead me to the garden. The maids fell silent, recognizing his unwavering focus. As he stepped outside, the tranquility of the garden unfolded before him. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of flowers and greenery, a stark contrast to the harsh environments he was accustomed to. Despite the beauty, his mind was elsewhere. This place offers no challenge. No war. No purpose. I adapt, but I do not belong here. With his senses sharp and his mind focused on the task at hand, the Marine pushed forward. The garden might have been a place of peace, but for him, it was simply another obstacle to move through. His mission remained his only priority. The Space Marine trudged down the narrow human-sized pathway, his heavy boots clunking against the cobblestones, each step a challenge as he tried to navigate the maze of flower beds and winding paths. The two maids behind him stifled giggles, whispering among themselves about how comically out of place he looked, a towering figure trying to fit into the delicate, human-scale garden. Ram. Look at him, Rem. He's like a bull in a china shop. Rem. It's not as easy as it looks. Ram. I'm sure he's used to much larger spaces, but one would think he could figure out how to move without causing a ruckus. As the Marine stumbled forward, his gaze shifted ahead, noticing Amelia standing in the distance, her figure framed by the soft glow of the setting sun. However, as he approached, he noticed something odd. The ground beneath her feet wasn't the usual lush, well-kept grass he expected from a garden. Instead, it was pitch black, like the soil had been swallowed by an unnatural darkness, an eerie contrast to the vibrant colors of the flowers. The Marine's brow furrowed, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was part of the garden's design or something far more ominous. The towering Space Marine stood in the middle of the ruined garden, his massive frame imposing even in the desolation. He adjusted his shirt, which stretched across his chest as he tried to navigate the crushed foliage with care. Ram circled him, eyes narrowing with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Rem, you should have let me handle this. This is a disaster. Rem, standing a little to the side, tilted her head and smiled faintly. Sister, I did my best. Finding clothes for someone his size isn't exactly easy. The Marine shifted his weight, his voice low and calm. These garments suffice. Functionality outweighs appearance. Ram snorted, crossing her arms. That's one way to put it. But you look ridiculous. Rem sighed, a soft smile tugging at her lips. At least he's not walking around in his armor anymore. That thing was scratching up the furniture. The Marine didn't seem to react to their teasing, instead carefully avoiding stepping on a ruined flower bed. Your accommodations are ill-suited for someone of my stature. Amelia stood a little further back, her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a soft chuckle escaping her. Her violet eyes sparkled with amusement as she observed the Marine's careful maneuvers. You're doing well, considering how. This place must be for you. The Marine paused and turned toward her, his stoic expression unchanging. Adaptation is necessary. However, this environment is challenging. Before Amelia could respond, Puck appeared, popping onto her shoulder. His tiny form stood in stark contrast to the Marine's towering presence, and he blinked at the sight of him. Whoa, Amelia. Where'd you find this giant? Amelia smiled, a soft giggle escaping her lips. He's a guest. He showed up under rather unusual circumstances. The Marine turned his intense gaze on Puck, sizing him up with careful scrutiny. What manner of creature are you? Puck tilted his head, his tail swishing in the air. I'm Puck. And you? What's your story, big guy? The Marine's brow furrowed, and he crossed his arms, his deep voice steady as he spoke. My memory is fragmented. I recall training and combat. Muscle memory intact, but much else remains unclear. Puck rubbed his chin thoughtfully, hovering in the air with his tiny hands on his face. Sounds like someone's been messing with your head. Memory tampering isn't easy, though. Whoever did it must be pretty powerful. Amelia's gaze softened as she stepped closer, speaking gently. When we found you, you were unconscious here. In the middle of what used to be a garden. The asteroid you arrived in destroyed it completely. The Marine's eyes didn't shift as he processed her words. Asteroid. Amelia nodded, her expression calm. Yes. It was like a meteor fell from the sky, and there you were, lying in the rubble, and axe was lodged in your chest. Felix healed you completely, even removed your armor, and pulled the axe from your chest with high difficulty, but it took time. You were in bad shape. The Marine's posture stiffened slightly as he clenched his fists, but he said nothing, the memories slowly resurfacing in fragments. Felix. A knight. A very talented one, Amelia said with a warm smile, stepping closer to him. He didn't ask for payment either. Just wanted to help. That's why you're here now. The Marine remained silent, staring at her for a long moment before his deep voice rumbled again. You took me in. Helped me recover. Why? Amelia's smile didn't falter, her eyes bright. Because it was the right thing to do. You may be a stranger, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve kindness. Puck hovered nearby, his tiny voice full of amusement. And hey, you're pretty interesting. Not every day we get someone who looks like they've stepped out of a legend. The Marine's expression softened ever so slightly as he relaxed his posture. Your actions are noted. I will repay this debt. There's no need for that, Amelia said quickly, her voice soft but firm. Just focus on recovering your memories. Maybe we can help you with that, too. Ram, still circling him, exchanged a glance with Rem, who raised an eyebrow. Ram spoke up, her tone laced with dry humor. If he doesn't crush the garden first. The Marine turned, ducking his head slightly to avoid hitting a low-hanging branch. His voice remained steady. My size is not an obstacle. It is an advantage. Amelia laughed softly, the sound light and genuine as she started walking toward the edge of the garden. Well, let's see if we can make this manor a little more comfortable for you in the meantime. Chapter 2. In the shadow of the tomb. The cold winds of the Necron tomb world swept over the ruined Imperial Temple, their howling echoing through the skeletal remains of ancient spires. At the edge of the temple's shadow, Brother Captain Marius of the Ultramarines and Brother Seraphiel of the Blood Angels stood in grim silence. Before them loomed the tomb's entrance, a dark, ominous chasm glowing faintly with alien energy. Marius's cobalt blue armor gleamed under the pale light, its polished ceramite unmarred by the sand swirling around him. Beside him, Seraphiel's crimson plate seemed to almost glow, adorned with ornate golden filigree, an echo of the noble legacy of Sanguinius. Breaking the silence, Marius spoke, his tone calm yet commanding. Unless you forget, Blood Angel, the Ultramarines ensure the Imperium's survival. 3 in 4 chapters descend from our gene seed. Ours is a legacy of strength and discipline. Seraphiel smirked faintly, his dark eyes glimmering with quiet resolve. And yet, brother Captain, strength alone is not enough. The Imperium needs more than discipline, it needs hope. It needs fire. That is what my chapter gives, even at the cost of our own souls. Marius studied the Blood Angel for a moment before nodding. Hope and fire. Noble ideals, brother, but ideals will not keep either of us alive in that tomb. What we face here is a threat that neither fire nor discipline can defeat alone. Seraphiel glanced toward the yawning abyss ahead of them, his expression darkening. Which is why I should be the one to descend, brother Captain. If both of us fall, there will be no one to report back to the chapters, no one to warn the Imperium of the Necron threat that festers here. Marius turned sharply to face him, his eyes hard. You would leave me behind. Stand here idle while your brothers descend into darkness. No, Seraphiel, that is not the warrior I see before me. It is not cowardice, brother Captain, Seraphiel replied, his voice steady but strained. It is duty. I am expendable. You, as a captain of the Ultramarines, are not. Marius frowned, his voice lowering but carrying the weight of command. Do not dishonor yourself with such words. No son of Sanguinius is expendable. You carry the blood of an angel. Your chapter's legacy is one of sacrifice, yes, but it is also one of greatness. To stand here and survive while others fall is not the role for a blood angel. Seraphiel faltered for a moment, his hands tightening on the hilt of his power sword. Then who will carry the warning? Who will ensure that others come to finish what we started if we fail? Marius's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. You will, brother, not because you are lesser, but because you are capable. This is not a retreat, it is a trust I place in you. Someone must live to warn the chapters, and I will not entrust that task to just anyone. I trust you, Seraphiel. The Blood Angel stared at him, the words cutting deeper than any blade. He saw no condescension in Marius's eyes, only respect and certainty. For all his initial resistance, Seraphiel realized the truth, Marius was not protecting him out of pity but ensuring their mission's survival in the only way he knew how, as a leader. With a heavy sigh, Seraphiel lowered his gaze. I do not like this, brother Captain. But, I will honor your trust. The Imperium must survive, no matter the cost. Marius placed a firm hand on Seraphiel's shoulder. And it will, brother. You will ensure it. But should I fall, remember this, we are brothers, no matter what blood flows through our veins. Ultramarine or Blood Angel, our purpose is the same. Seraphiel nodded, his voice quieter now. I will not fail you, Marius. May the Emperor guide you. Marius offered a faint smile before donning his helm. And may Sanguinius's fire burn within you. Farewell, Seraphiel. As Marius descended into the tomb's shadowy depths, Seraphiel stood at the edge, his crimson armor catching the last light of the dying sun. Though his heart burned with the instinct to follow, he remained, knowing his duty now lay elsewhere. He whispered a quiet prayer to the Emperor and his Primarch, promising that Marius's sacrifice would not be in vain. The wind howled around him as he took up his position at the temple ruins, watching over the tomb's entrance. Alone, he would wait, ready to fight should the Necron threat rise from the depths. Though divided by duty, their bond as brothers endured, a testament to the unity of the Adeptus Astartes, forged in blood and honor. The ruins of the Imperial Temple stood in solemn silence under the darkened skies. Brother Seraphiel stood alone, his power sword sheathed and his chainsword gripped tightly in both hands, its teeth occasionally whirring in anticipation. The howling wind had died, leaving only the oppressive stillness of the tomb world to fill his ears. For hours, he had waited, crimson-clad and unmoving, his golden gaze fixed on the entrance to the Necron tomb. His thoughts strayed to brother Captain Marius, the Ultramarine who had descended into the abyss alone. You trusted me to survive, Marius. Now I must trust you to return. Suddenly, faint echoes of heavy, uneven footsteps broke the silence. The sound sent a chill through Seraphiel's veins. His hands tightened on the hilt of his chainsword as he turned sharply, his enhanced vision piercing the haze. From the gloom emerged a familiar figure, tall and imposing in cobalt blue ceramite, but unsteady. Seraphiel, came the rasping voice. Marius. Seraphiel's heart leapt as he dropped his guard, running toward his battle brother. As he approached, his joy turned to dread. The mighty captain staggered forward, his normally immaculate armor scorched and cracked. Glowing green particles shimmered ominously across his back, the remnants of a Necron atom-destroying ray. His helmet was gone, revealing a face pale with exhaustion, his jaw clenched tightly in pain. Seraphiel reached him just as Marius faltered. "Brother, lean on me. Let me help you." He reached out, his hands catching the ultramarine before he could fall to the ground. But Marius, with a grimace, shrugged off Seraphiel's support. "No," he rasped, his voice strained yet commanding. With shaking hands, he pulled a small, heavily sealed box from a compartment on his belt. Its surface was marked with sacred sigils and Mechanicus inscriptions. "This," Marius said, pressing the box into Seraphiel's hands. "The device, to disable the shields. Take it." Seraphiel stared at the box, realization dawning in his eyes. "Brother Captain, you cannot mean." Marius interrupted him with a sharp glare. "No words, Seraphiel. Only action. Take it, and retreat. 2 of us are not enough to destroy this tomb. Rally reinforcements. Finish the mission." Seraphiel's hands trembled as he took the box, his golden eyes filled with grief. He wanted to argue, to insist that Marius stay with him, but the captain's resolve left no room for debate. "I swear, Marius," Seraphiel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will return, and I will destroy this tomb. For you." Marius gave a faint smile, though pain racked his every movement. "You carry the fire of angels, Seraphiel. Now, go. Do not let my sacrifice be for nothing." Before Seraphiel could respond, a new sound reached his ears, metallic, precise, and unrelenting. The rhythmic pounding of countless Necron footsteps echoed through the ruins. The mechanical soldiers were coming, their relentless march growing louder with every second. Seraphiel's heart raced as he glanced toward the tomb's entrance. "They're close," he muttered, gripping the box tightly. He turned to Marius, his voice urgent. "We must move." But Marius shook his head, his strength rapidly fading. "I will delay them, for as long as I can." "No," Seraphiel said firmly, his voice rising with desperation. "I will not leave you. You must." Marius roared, his voice booming despite his weakened state. He drew his power sword, planting it in the ground to steady himself. "This is my duty, Seraphiel. Yours is to finish what we started. Go." Seraphiel hesitated for a single, agonizing moment before nodding, his teeth gritted in determination. "I will return with vengeance, brother Captain. You have my word." With that, Seraphiel turned and began to sprint toward the extraction point, the sacred box clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him, he heard the unmistakable hum of Necron weapons powering up and the clash of Marius's sword meeting metallic enemies. As he ran, a single thought burned in his mind: "I will get them home. This is not the end." The sounds of battle faded into the distance, but Seraphiel did not look back. His retreat was not cowardice, it was survival, fueled by a promise to his brother and the Imperium. Somewhere in the dark halls of the tomb, Marius made his final stand, cobalt and gold shining brightly even as the enemy surrounded him. And Seraphiel, the angel who carried the fire of hope, disappeared into the horizon, vowing to bring light to the shadowed world once again. The shelter was plunged into uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional sound of shuffling feet or whispered prayers. The air felt heavy, not just from the damp confines of the underground refuge but from the dread that gripped everyone inside. They had heard it, the distinct sound of the metal hatch above being wrenched open. "What now?" someone muttered, their voice trembling. "They've found us," another whispered, panic rising in their tone. "It's the Xenos." The people huddled closer together, their fear palpable. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, echoing ominously through the tunnels. The sound was unlike anything they'd heard before, not the clanking, mechanical march of the Necrons, but something more methodical, more purposeful. The priest stepped forward, his ragged robes trailing behind him as he held a small, flame-wreathed staff aloft. His hands trembled, but his resolve did not waver. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "I will see what comes." As the priest approached the shadowed tunnel entrance, he began to chant softly, calling upon the Emperor's light. The flames atop his staff grew brighter, casting flickering illumination across the ferrocrete walls. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until finally, a massive figure emerged from the darkness. A collective gasp swept through the civilians. The priest froze, his eyes widening as the light of his staff illuminated crimson ceramite. The figure was immense, towering over him, his armor battered and scorched but gleaming with the golden aquila of the Imperium. "An angel," the priest breathed, his voice trembling as he stepped back instinctively. The blood angel paused, his bolter held in one hand, his other resting near the hilt of his chainsword. Realizing the fear in their eyes, he slowly reached up and removed his helmet. With a soft hiss, the seal broke, and the helm came away, revealing a face that was both noble and severe. His pale skin was streaked with blood and dirt, and his golden eyes burned with intensity. Some of the civilians gasped in awe, while others shrank back, still uncertain. The sight of him was as intimidating as it was awe-inspiring. Seraphiel, sensing their hesitation, quietly holstered his bolter. "Greetings," he said, his voice deep but calm, echoing in the stillness. The priest stepped forward cautiously, his hands gripping the staff tightly. His voice faltered as he asked, "Are you one of the Emperor's angels?" "I am," Seraphiel replied simply, his golden gaze meeting the priest's. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a small voice broke the tension. "You're bleeding," said a young boy, no older than 7, stepping forward from the crowd. His face was smeared with dirt, his ragged clothes hanging loosely on his thin frame. His wide eyes stared at the crimson warrior with innocent curiosity. Seraphiel glanced down, following the boy's gaze to a deep gash along his side, where his armor had been breached. Dried blood stained the ceramite around the wound, though it had already begun to clot. "I was," Seraphiel said, his tone softening. "But no longer." The boy tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "I didn't know angels could bleed," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Seraphiel knelt slowly, lowering himself to the boy's level. The civilians tensed, unsure of his intent, but the blood angel's movements were deliberate and calm. He reached out, gently placing his massive gauntlet on the boy's small shoulder. "Even angels bleed," Seraphiel said, his voice quiet but firm. "But we do not fall. Not while there are those to protect." The boy stared at him for a moment, then nodded, a faint smile breaking through the dirt on his face. The priest, emboldened by the exchange, stepped closer. "You are truly one of the Emperor's chosen," he murmured. "What brings you here, Angel of Death?" Seraphiel stood, his full height towering over them once more. His golden gaze swept over the frightened group, lingering on the faces of the weak and weary. He took a deep breath. "I have come to ensure your survival," he said, his voice steady. "The Necron threat will not claim you. Not while I draw breath." The civilians exchanged uncertain glances, but the priest nodded, his expression one of cautious hope. "Then we will place our faith in you, as we do in the Emperor." Seraphiel looked at the priest, then at the boy, and finally at the group as a whole. The weight of their hope was heavy, but he bore it without complaint. "Stay together," he said firmly. "The Emperor's light shines even in the darkest places. And so long as I stand, that light will not falter." The footsteps of distant Necrons echoed faintly down the tunnels, growing louder. Seraphiel's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his chainsword. He turned to the priest. "Guide him to safety," he said. "I will hold the line." As the civilians moved to obey, Seraphiel donned his helmet once more. The boy lingered for a moment, looking back at the blood angel before finally retreating with his family. Seraphiel stood alone at the entrance, his chainsword roaring to life as he prepared to face the darkness once more. Present day. In the tranquil garden of the Roswell Manor, the morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft patterns across the grass. Seraphiel knelt slowly, lowering himself to the young half-elf's level. His silver hair caught the light, though his eyes were shadowed with uncertainty. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "For everything. I don't remember who I am, but until I recover my memories, I'd like to serve you, if you'll allow it." Amelia tilted her head, her amethyst eyes full of curiosity and warmth. "You don't remember your name?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, not yet." She paused, studying him thoughtfully, then offered a small, reassuring smile. "Well, until you do, I suppose we'll just have to figure it out together."